Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 3 of the Human Geography course. It's all about spatial interaction and behavior. Again, this is Chapter 3, GEO102, Human Geography. Before we get going, don't forget to look through the Blackboard list of things to do. Make sure that you take care of everything that is required of you this week. All the assignments and deadlines, and you should be good to go. So let's get going with the lesson. You know, spatial interaction and behavior it's almost a little bit of psychological. It's basically trying to explain, the idea of space and how, how you like your own space and you like your own boundaries never to be interacted with. People tend to be that way. And this is a way of looking at that. Obviously, it's a little bit bigger scale than just interpersonal space and interaction, but it does play a role in it, how you think about it. So we're going to talk about the idea of the basis for interaction, how places interact is based on several models. And these are conceptual models, meaning they are sort of examples. A map is a conceptual model. So there are three of them: complementarity, transferability, and an intervening opportunity. So this is a little bit more of the theoretical framework. The first one, here's a good example of interaction, and that would be the subway system of New York. And not only the subway system of New York, but also the New Jersey Transit, all the different lines that come either from Port Jervis or Spring Valley or Hackettstown or Gladstone or High Bridge or Trenton or Bayhead, and they all basically connect at Secaucus Junction on their way to either Hoboken, Newark, or New York Penn Station. Once at New York Penn Station, you can find your way anywhere in New York City by using the mass transit or MTA system. That's interaction. That's the ability to connect different places that are relatively close, yet not next to one another. And so this allows people to, say, live all the way out at Port Jervis or Middletown, New York, and be able to work daily in a place like Hoboken or Jersey City or New York. It's a bit of a commute, obviously, but that mass transit really allows you to be able to connect to that. So the first model is called complementarity. For two places to interact, one must have what another place wants and can use. And really, it's the idea of, if you have customers in a shopping center, and then you have those same customers and a new shopping center opens closer, the majority of those customers are going to go to that new place. And in our area, I can think of, if you think about the idea of the old Nanuet, the shops at Nanuet, and before that used to be the Palisades Mall. And the Palisades Mall is big, and it was full of stores, right? But then again, the shops at Nanuet were there before, but it had sort of fallen into disrepair. Well, guess what? A lot of money was spent on that. The Apple store was basically drawn away from the Palisades, and it basically formed sort of the flagship store of the shops at Nanuet. And now that's sort of become a trendier, more hip place for people to go spend their time and their money. And so people who may have never, ever even thought of going to the shops at Nanuet now go there in place of the Palisades Mall. Now, that's not universally the case, but it sort of fits this model pretty well, quite frankly. The next one is transferability, is the ability of what are the acceptable costs of an exchange between two places. So it's an expression of the mobility of a commodity. So for example, oil, that's a really good example of a commodity, something that everybody needs. And it's really based on these four factors right there. So a good example of that is, of course, oil. Oil, we are willing to go get it in places that are very, very, very far from us, and in places that may not be the most stable. The Middle East, for example. Venezuela, for example, and other such places. Why? Because even in this day and age of climate change discussions and alternative energy discussions, oil, fossil fuels, drives the entire planetary economy still. Even if we want to eventually move towards a better, cleaner, more sustainable energy economy. That's just the way it is to this day. Okay, think about the idea of the iPhone. This is an image here of the iPhone 11, the newest iPhone that there is. And I'm sure there's going to be an iPhone 12 or 13 or whatever they're going to call it next. In any event, it comes from China. While the software and the ideas are in Cupertino, California, the phone itself comes from China. It's built and assembled there. So we're talking about technology flows across Earth space. Finally, number 3 would be an intervening opportunity. Although complementarity can be effective only in the absence of more attractive alternatives, and an intervening opportunity serves to reduce supply-demand interactions that otherwise might basically make distance an issue, okay? So that's the idea there. You want to measure things like, you're talking about measuring interaction, the idea of decay with distance, and other such movement interaction issues. So I'll let that up for you to look into the book. I do want to get into the idea of human spatial behavior. Now we're going to talk about migration, mobility versus migration. The idea that, people want to move to certain places as a function of how comfortable they are with that movement. For example, if you are going to move to the Southeast US, you know that you're going to have to deal with hurricanes. If you're going to move to California, you know you're going to have to deal with earthquakes and fires. That's just a natural part of that environment. So it's a calculated risk that you take when you make that move. Now, there are many other factors that you take into account. Income potential, climate, taxes, cost of living. All those things are part of that sort of human calculus that you're making in order to find a place either attractive to move to or less attractive to move to. And the idea of human spatial behavior, and you do this on a daily basis. You have a territoriality, you have a pattern that is very specific to you. So you may have a home, and in that home, you may go to school or a particular shopping center or a friend or maybe a workout location. And chances are you have a little mental map that you could basically draw in your head from which you really don't deviate that much. You pretty much stick to that map that's in your head pretty regularly. And people tend to have that. And here in New York, I talk about the idea of the Hudson River. The Hudson River almost becomes like an invisible fence. Many people cross it, obviously, on a daily basis, but a lot of people just basically stay on either side of that river. Why? Because crossing it can be expensive. Crossing it can be problematic because of traffic and traffic jams and the bridge and all the stuff that goes along with crossing the Hudson River. So people tend to stay in Rockland and in Orange, or they might stay in Westchester and Putnam. Now, of course, people cross it every day. In some cases, there is no avoiding that. But in other cases, there are many opportunities that are available on either side of that river that allow people to make decisions to stay on either side pretty much all the time. And maybe the only reason they would cross the river would be to go into actual New York City. Because at that point, New York City clearly offers more than really any region around it. So again, another way of thinking of human spatial behavior. I love these images right here, whether it be the Tokyo subway pushers, in which they literally just jam people into a subway car. And again, think about that in New York City. You could not get away with that in New York, but the cultural calculus in a place like Japan sort of allows it. And this dude, which I think is doing a very cool thing, and he has like a little ring around his waist, which doesn't allow people to get any closer to him than about 2 feet. And obviously this is sort of a joke, but again, it's a way of getting people to think about their personal space. And you do it all the time. You do it all the time, okay? We're gonna talk about migration next. Migration can be intercontinental, mean between continents, move from the US to Europe, for example. Migration can be intracontinental. That could be between the New York and Los Angeles. And then migration can be interregional within countries. So you move from New York to, say, Washington or Boston or Florida. So a little bit closer in space. Across the Earth, most movements tend to be from the rural regions to urban regions. So from the countryside to cities. That is, generally speaking, what migration is like across Earth in 2020 and beyond, okay? Again, that rural to urban, movements of people from agricultural regions to cities. It has been the predominant movement in the Industrial Revolution and beyond, and it is prevalent today in especially developing parts of the world. Forced migration. So slavery was an example of forced migration. When people are forced to repatriate foreign national areas, or when people are expelled. And here's an example of the forced migration of Africans out of course, Africa into places that we today call South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and what would have been British and French North America back before the US was a US. Again, the idea of slavery and how most people, how it broke down back in 1860. And if you want to think about the idea of ethnicity, even to this day, if you think of this color right here, this sort of maroon, the majority of states in Southern Virginia, North, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, East Texas, and North Florida are primarily and predominantly African American. And that goes back to this 1860 look at population, and it goes back to, of course, the slave trade in the 1500s to 1800s. Here's another way of looking at the way that it affects regions, and this would be the red and blue presidential election of 2016, okay? And in this case, you're looking at the influence of cities versus urban regions. So President Trump won the majority of the country in terms of space, but Hillary Clinton won the bigger cities. So for example, the San Francisco and LA, even in Texas, you can see Dallas, you can see Austin, you can see San Antonio, you can see Houston. And of course, you can see where that African-American predominant region was through the Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, okay? So you can sort of see that echo even in 2016, and chances are in 2020, that the election map will look, obviously it'll be different map, but it will have a similar pattern in terms of its look, okay? Other migration, so issues that were sort of forced, and we're talking about Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi back in the 1990s, and that would have been, if you ever watched the movie, and the name escapes me right now, but Hotel Rwanda, that's what I'm thinking of. And we're talking about the idea of ethnic cleansing, and we're talking about differences in not race, because we're talking about African versus African, but now we're talking about different African ethnicities and tribal backgrounds. In this case, it was the Hutu and the Tutsi and they basically have a different view of the world, basically. And as a result, it led to really a remarkably horrible ethnic cleansing in a very, very short period of time. Okay. And again, it led to mass migrations that were forced when the people felt no better option than to move. Other types of migration, we'll get into that. Here's the Trail of Tears. And I think I may have mentioned this previously, the idea of Native Americans that were forcibly moved out of Florida and the Southeast US into what we call Oklahoma today. Okay, and other migrations out of the South into what we call the Iron or the Rust Belt in Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And of course, the Northeast, Richmond, Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, into Boston, and so on. Reluctant. Reluctant is less than fully voluntary. So for example, when dams are going to be built, they usually tell people you have several years to get out before we build this dam, which will create this giant lake where you live, essentially. So these are aggressive governmental relocation campaigns, and they're often in the name of progress and in the name of advance and in the name of cheap hydro energy. So for example, the Three Gorges Dam in China and the Itaipu Dam in Brazil. Both of these are really remarkably big projects which displaced many, many people who didn't really want to leave. Voluntary would be you. More than likely you, and I'm talking about you SUNY Orange students, more than likely fit this type of migration. You can go wherever you want, unless, you know, if you're not married and you don't have any kids, you have a lot more freedom. Even if you're married and have kids, you're probably young enough where migration isn't that big a deal, and you have options. If you want to move to a warmer climate or a different state or a different part of New York, or a different area of the world, if you want to pick that. So that's the idea of voluntary migration. There's many more options available to you. Migration is often controlled by what are called push and pull factors. Push factors push you away, so they tend to be negative. And that would be like poor infrastructure, slums, an awful housing market, abandoned parts of cities. And that would be a place like Detroit, unfortunately, even to this day, where you have sort of abandoned Michigan Central Station, which is what used to be their version of Grand Central Station in New York. Well, this is their version of it in Detroit, completely abandoned. So that's a push factor. That's what it looks like inside, a beautiful building otherwise. Or you can talk about the idea of pull factors, and these are the things that are positive, the things that pull you towards someplace. Okay, and that could be climate, that could be lower taxes, that could be more room, that could be job opportunities, safety, a whole bunch of things together. So a good place would be, for example, Las Vegas. Las Vegas offers many, many opportunities. Las Vegas offers relatively cheap housing. Las Vegas has no state tax. Las Vegas is always warm, even in winter. In summer is, of course, very hot. But it has a lot of opportunity for people to go there and frankly take advantage of that opportunity. It allows people to basically make a fresh start. And as a result, it has a lot of pull factors, very attractive for people to go there. You could move to Las Vegas and become a car dealer and do things like 21 or blackjack or poker, or become a really good casino dealer. And you can make yourself a pretty good income, upwards of $80,000 to $100,000, and live in a place that has no state income tax. So that's very attractive to a lot of people. So it allows you to maybe afford homes in housing that you may not otherwise be able to afford in a place like New York or Massachusetts or Washington, D.C., for example. Okay. We'll talk about the idea of migration, whether it be step migration. Step migration is, from rural to central city, a series of less extreme locational changes. So that might be like moving from, say, Orange County in New York to, say, Essex County in New Jersey, immediately next to the city, or moving to Nassau County, or moving to the Bronx. So you sort of stepped your way out of one location into a place slightly closer to where you want to be. Okay, we'll talk about the idea of chain migration, and that's the idea of the mover as part of an established migrant flow from a common area. So think about Greenpoint in Brooklyn, and that is primarily Polish or Chinatown or Little Italy, or places that already have established populations to which people from other places can go. Think of it as their final destination in that place. So there's already a built-in support mechanism for individuals that go there. So that's the lesson for this week. Migration is kind of the bigger part of it. I want you to really get a good sense of migration. I hope you do get a chance to look through this video, of course, if you're listening to it, but also to make sure that you go through the YouTube playlist. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Don't forget your forum, and don't forget everything that is due this week per the to-do list on Blackboard. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.